Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost control of the presentation somehow. There we go. All right, so like I said, I did this presentation a few days ago at SQL Saturday, Minnesota. So that was the first time that I gave this one. I got a little bit of feedback there. But as I go through, if you guys have any feedback, then I'll definitely take it. Because after creating 4 new presentations this year, I think next year I'll start to do some of them more than once. So I want to start to really perfect these. So a little bit about myself to start off with. This is actually my first MadPass meeting, so I thought I would kick off my first one by presenting here. I am a senior consultant here with Talavant. I took kind of a non-traditional path to get into this field. I went to school for education here at UW, and after doing a bunch of different things, I worked for a radio station for a while. I did work at a school for a little bit. I finally found my way into a role as a sales assistant, and there somebody decided to start teaching me how to work with SQL, and kind of started getting into reporting a little bit and fell in love with that. So did pretty much anything that I could to keep learning more, read books, went online, did pretty much everything that we're all familiar with to keep learning. And then I worked for a period of time for a benefits administrator doing data migration. So they worked with like flex spending accounts, health savings accounts. Did that, and then I also worked for a large bank for a little while before coming to work for Talavant. And now I do, most of what I've done has been with a lot of like data integration stuff with SSIS and reporting with SSRS. I've done some stuff with some Azure services, but I'm still getting into that a little bit more. So really what I enjoy doing a lot is kind of the SSIS, SSRS. So that's what I choose to speak about. This year at SQL Saturday Madison, I did kind of the same presentation that I'm doing today, this intro level, but for SSIS. And I really like to do these intro level kind of courses or presentations because I think this is something that could have really benefited me when I was first getting into the field. But I was just too intimidated to go to SQL Saturday for a couple of years before I finally went. So I think it's really important to have these more intro level things. And I always like to have more female presenters, and it felt hypocritical to complain about that, but then not be willing to present myself. So that's why I take advantage of these opportunities. And then, so as you saw there, I've been in this field for about 5 years. So I'll present on this. I have a lot of experience working with SSRS, but there's always opportunities to learn more. So if anybody here has worked with it, please feel free to jump in as I'm going through the presentation. Has anybody here worked with SSRS before? Good. Okay, so about half the people. So some of this is definitely going to be really intro level for you, but then when we're looking at examples, there might be some more advanced features that you haven't worked with in a while or just haven't worked with, or you can kind of give the whole group suggestions as we go through. So really the target audience, like I said, is beginner level, or if you just kind of have an interest in this as a, just trying to learn more about SSRS as a reporting tool. We're going to cover a few things today. So talk about what is SQL Server Reporting Services, what type of reporting is best suited to SSRS. We actually talked about that a little bit earlier. You know, the different reporting services and how you would choose which one. We are going to familiarize ourselves with the environment in Visual Studio. So there is, when you're building out reports, you could do it in Visual Studio. You can use Report Builder. We're going to use Visual Studio today. We will actually go through building a sample report, and then we'll look at some examples that I built out just to see some of the more advanced functionality that we wouldn't have time to go through in an hour session. And then we'll just talk about report subscription. So once the report is built, how are your users actually interacting with it? And then things that we're not going to have time to cover, we won't actually install SQL Server data tools. If that's something that you want to look into, this handout does have some links on it. And I can give a PDF to anyone who wants it to actually click on the link instead of typing it in, because that's a little putsy. And we're not going to actually go through creating a reporting server or creating a report subscription, but like I said, we'll talk about actually creating a subscription. And then at the end of this, I just want you to walk away with a baseline understanding of SSRS and why you might use it depending on your type of reporting, how to get started with creating a report, and then also some additional resources if you want to learn more. And then if anybody has questions as we go along, please just feel free to ask them, jump right in. So first off, what is SQL Server Reporting Services? It is a tool for building and generating reports, as that's what we're going to focus on today. It's really best suited to paginated and tabular reporting. So with SSRS, you can go onto the reporting server and you can run your report directly from there, but any reports could also be exported to a PDF or exported to Excel, depending how people want to interact with them. And it's really good for reports that are really table-based and look like this here. I'm a Harry Potter nerd, so one of the examples we're going to look at has some Harry Potter stuff in here. But if you have something that is a table, you know, columns and rows of data, that's really what SSRS is really used for. If you are looking for something where users are going to interact a little bit more, like click around and want more of a dashboard thing, that might be a different reporting service that you would use. You can use parameters, so you see, I don't want to move too much. Okay, so if we look at here, we have some parameters, and we'll look at that more when we're actually going through the demo. So you can use parameters to narrow down your search results, and then you can run these reports on demand. So going into the reporting server, you can just click run, or it can be done through automated scheduling. So if you just want a report to run at a certain time every day or once a week, then you have that option. So the next thing that we're going to do, and here we might have to make sure, is this still displaying for the meeting? Okay.
Yep.
Oh.
That did stop displaying it.
Try this again. Is that still? I definitely do. There we go. Now we're good?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go through Visual Studio, and when you're actually working with this, if it is hard to see and you want to follow along, there should be a picture of the same thing that we're looking at. But I'm just going to walk through within Visual Studio. This is the surface that you're going to be working with when you're actually building reports. So I'll start over here, which I think is listed out as G, but then if you want to take notes on anything as we go, you can. So starting off here, if you've ever worked with anything in Visual Studio, you're probably familiar with how it's set up. So you'll have your solution and then your project underneath it. So this project is just sample reports. If I wanted to create a new project or new report, it's really just file, new, project. And then once this menu pops up, I would choose reporting services. It was open before, under business intelligence reporting services. And then I would create my project. So if you've ever created any project in Visual Studio, it's pretty simple to walk through that. Over here, so we have underneath our project, we have our shared data sources. So we have data sources in two different areas with reports. When it comes to shared data sources, that means that this data source, and in our case, these are both databases, can be used for any report that we create within this project. Later, we'll look at kind of linking the shared data source to the actual report. You can create a data source that is embedded within your report, but then you would have to recreate that every time. So if you have one that you're going to be using for multiple reports, which typically that happens, you would want to create it there. And to actually create a data source, it's very simple. We would just right click, add new data source. The standard that I follow is to just name it the same thing as whatever the database that I'm using is named. And then you can put in the connection string, or if you hit edit, then you can connect from here. If I'm just using my local server, then I get this drop down and I can see all the databases that I have to choose from. So it's really simple to set that up. We already have the ones that we need, so I'm not going to add any additional ones there. Right below that is shared data sets. So data sources, we're thinking of the database. A data set would be like a result set from a query or a stored procedure that we're using. So a shared data set is one that you would want to use across multiple reports. I typically end up embedding my data sets within the reports because they're specific to whatever report I'm writing. So we'll look at examples of that. And then we just have the actual report. So these are examples that we'll be looking at, but then later I'll walk through actually creating a new report. And then right below that, we have our properties menu. And I'm just gonna, there we go. So under here, we have our properties. I always like to recommend, if you're just starting out with this, really get familiar with what properties are available for what objects you're highlighting. Just because sometimes it can be kind of difficult to dig through and find where you want to update different pieces of information. And it's a little bit easier to do it with the properties pane. And I'll also show later that using the properties pane makes it a little bit easier to make changes to multiple sections at a time instead of going one by one. So definitely just get familiar with that. And then working our way along, we have our row groups and column groups. This report that we're looking at doesn't utilize those. One that we will look at later does use that. Row groups and column groups are just a way that you're going to group your information. So when we look at a report, we'll look at one where it's like an employee directory and we have a lot of employees that are assigned to one department. So I group things on department. So you'll see the way that that actually gets displayed within the report itself. Moving over to this pane here, we have our toolbox. So these are all of the items that are when you're building out a report. If you look at the first 2 pages here, I provide a description, or Microsoft provides a description. So these descriptions did come from Microsoft documentation that's referenced at the end here. And it just provides a breakdown of what each of these tools are. So going through them, we have the first one is the pointer, which is just switching back to the pointer. But then we have the text box. So a text box is just what it sounds like. Examples of that are like this and that one. Those are all text boxes. So you can have you can put static text in there. You can put expressions in there. You can reference fields from your data source. There's a lot that you can do with text boxes, and you can kind of move them around your report surface. Line is just drawing a line. There are tables. We have a table and a matrix that behave a little bit differently. So they both show data in a tabular fashion, but the table is going to have a static number of columns. It'll always have that number of columns. And then the number of rows will vary depending on the data that's returned. A matrix will have a variable number of columns and rows depending on your data set. So we'll look at examples of both of those, but you'll see that a matrix can grow as you are working with different types of data. Below that is a rectangle. So rectangle is just a really great formatting tool. When looking at just this report here, all of these things are kind of different components. So this is actually a table. This is a text box. This is a text box. So if I had all these things here and then I wanted to move everything, it can be kind of a pain. So a rectangle is a really good way of just formatting stuff in your report and then moving it all at once. And then right below that is a list, which is kind of similar to a rectangle, and it's a container, but it allows you to group data. So this one that we're looking at is actually an example of a list box. So if I highlight this here, this is a list box. And we'll look when we actually look at this report that what this does, this container does, is it will repeat this for every instance of author because I have it grouped on author. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, but you'll see examples of how that differs from some of the other formatting. And then image is just an image, exactly like it sounds. Sub-report is a report that you can embed within a report. So if we have a table can reference one data source, but you could, if you really wanted, you could embed a sub-report even within a table or just within a different area of the report. So you could bring in, you could have 2 of these reports linked. You can also just create links between the 2, so you could link to a different report. The few below that, so I'll go through all of these together then, chart, gauge, map, data bar, sparkline, and indicator are just different types of graphics, visuals that you can use. I haven't used a ton of them. We will look at an example with the data bar. I haven't actually used a map when building out a report in SSRS. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is it possible to build an SSRS report which allows you to edit the underlying data? Can you modify an SSRS report and change the data? Is that possible?
I haven't done it. Has anybody else here done that?
Yeah, you can make it call. Yeah.
So like you can edit the data.
I was actually just wondering about that too.
It'll update the underlying data based on what you typed in.
Because the data source can be a stored procedure.
Yeah, so if you entered something in the parameter and then you run it, it could do that. I've actually been wondering about that too, so good question. Has anybody actually used a map?
Oh, quick. So you can edit a parameter and that updates the data that you see, right? You're saying you can also edit the underlying data itself and push it back. You can't do that.
Oh, yeah, like if the data that's like presented in the table, no. Okay, any questions about any of those tools? All right, and then just jumping over here, switching panes. So then this is our actual report data pane. So a few things here, built-in fields, these are like our system variables. So one that I use all the time is execution time. So that if you put it in here, it'll just let you know what time the report was executed. I think that's always really valuable, especially if you have a business user who says, hey, I ran this report, this doesn't look right, they send it to you. Just having that execution time on there can be really valuable. I did a training with a client who asked if they could have like all of the variables that are entered show up on the report. And I also thought that was a great idea, because then if a user came and said, hey, this data isn't right, you could see exactly what they entered at runtime. So, but these are always going to be the same, those fields over there. Right below that are the parameters that you have set up. So for this particular report, I do have some parameters set up. If you bring in a data source, like a stored procedure that takes parameters, it will automatically populate those in there. You can also create your own parameters to interact with the report. So it will interact just with the report and it won't actually go back to the stored procedure. So you have the option to do that. Any images that you put into the report will go here. And then data sources. So this is kind of what I talked about before. Once I actually create my report, then this here is just a link back to the shared data source. And then below that is where I have my data set that is specific to this report. So with your data set, you can do a stored procedure, or you could have a query directly in here. I typically will go towards stored procedures. Just for performance, it's a lot easier to then edit the stored procedure that you're working with, especially if you have that being used in more than one place. It's so much easier to make that change there. If you wanted to do a query instead, you could just hit text, and I'll actually, once that goes away, I'll show an example. So this list here, I just have a query just to show both of them. There we go. So then you can just have a query directly in here. If you wanted to actually look at the results that you would get for that query, you can use this query designer. And then you can execute directly from here, and it'll return the results that you would see. So this here would just execute it, and I would see the result. And then moving along here, we have two tabs up at the top there. So design and preview. Typically, you're going to spend most of your time in the design tab. So this is where you're actually designing the report. And then the preview tab will show you what it's going to look like once it's rendered. So I have this one set up with a few different parameters that we'll dig into more later, but it's not actually going to run until all of the required parameters are filled out. So if I enter a value here for author, then I click view report, then it's actually going to show me what the report's going to look like. So as you're building out a report, you'll spend a lot of time jumping back and forth between the design and the preview. Sometimes if I have a lot, like if I look at the preview and there are a lot of changes I want to make, I'll just take a screenshot and throw it on another screen so I can work on those. Or I'll just like make a list of all the different changes that I want to make. But you kind of jump back and forth between the two quite a bit. So any questions on this view or anything to add from somebody who's worked with it before? All right, so we can go ahead and build a report, and I'm gonna take a seat for this part of it. And then we'll take a closer look at some of the example reports that are already built out. So to create a new report, I'm just going to right click here. If I do add new report, it will take me through a wizard. You can certainly use that option. Instead, I'm just going to do add new item. And the report that we're going to create is using a stored procedure I already wrote against the AdventureWorks data warehouse, which is admittedly not the most exciting data to work with, but it's really great for just this quick demo here. And so what we're going to be doing is pulling a list of the products that they have available. So I'm just naming this report products. We're going to add that. So this is what the blank surface looks like. You can see here the only thing available are the built-in fields. So the first thing that I need to do is link this with a data source. So if I right click on that and do add data source, what I like to do is if I'm adding a shared data source, I like to name it the exact same thing just so it's really clear where that's coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and name that AdventureWorks. I am using a shared data source. If I wasn't, I would put my connection in here. And then from the dropdown, I'm just going to choose that one. So now that I've associated the report with a data source, I can add my data set. And then what I like to do here also is name the data set like the same thing that I have my stored procedure named as, just because it's a quick, easy way for me to look and see where I'm getting my data from. And I'm going to embed this in my report. So I'm going to choose AdventureWorks data source, and then I'm going to choose the stored procedure. So this one that I created is this products. And from here, I can then look at the fields, the fields that it's pulling in. It will automatically populate. If there are any parameters associated with it, it would populate those here. I don't have any in this particular procedure. Yes.
So I saw a box for query designer. Is the query designer in here Power Query?
I haven't used Power Query, so I don't know if anybody.
It's just a really ugly.
It's not
stripped
great.
down SSMS.
Yeah, it's like if you do the like right click in Management Studio and you kind of build out your query that way.
The Power Query is not part of SSRS.
Yeah.
You can't like, yeah, okay.
It has a GUI interface for people that don't know SQL, so you could do if you think of Access, you could click these 5 tables
and
create
draw
join
links
statements,
between
yeah.
to do your joins and stuff. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like in your stored procedure, you get back a result set. Say like it's sales and it's like Northeast region, whatever, blah. So that's the result set and you get it back, and then SSRS massage that and pivot it? Or should you be doing your pivot in the database?
I would have to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you use a matrix image to take your tabular and then have it pivot.
Yeah. So we'll look at that with a different report, and then you can see
Okay.
if that would answer
All right.
that
You
question.
would just drag your field up the rows.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take a look and see if that answers your question, and then we can dig in a little bit.
Pivot and SQL, and it's a real you can just pass it on pivot and come up.
Yeah.
You know, the thing with the DBA is like it's probably down the road.
Your kids, I mean.
Yeah.
All right, so we have our data set. So you can see that here are all the fields. We're just going to create a really basic table. So you can either drag this in, you can double click it, it'll show up. The table will default to give you 3 columns, which is really frustrating because I find that I almost never need only 3 columns. I've done plenty of searching. There's not a good way to add multiple columns at a time. If anyone else has found one, I would love to know. But I just add them one by one or copy from another report where I have. Yep. Oh, yeah. So I'm just creating the columns. Yep. But I will demo exactly what you just said. So I'm just creating 7 columns here for our data. So with this table, because we only have one data set right now, I have the option, if you see as I'm going through, it has this little icon here. I can click on that and it'll know what data set I want to associate with. Or I think this is what you're talking about. I can just drag it over. A new column. Is that what? We're going to test this. Oh, maybe because I have enough. I don't know. Yeah, but no, that's.
I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, I'm gonna try more. Because I've searched for better options than doing that one column at a time, but I have yet to find one.
No, this is
Okay, so as you can see, once we pulled the fields in there, the actual fields that are coming from our data set are going to be in these brackets. And then it tries to give friendlier names to the headers here. So these are going to be static values. If you have casing differences, that's how it's going to break it up. Or if you have underscores, then it'll put a space instead of an underscore in there for you. So at the most basic level, now we have a table. If I click preview, this is going to look pretty terrible and is probably not something that we would want to present to a business user. But now this is where you start jumping back and forth and deciding how you want your report to actually look. So we saw the description column is really cramped. So we're going to expand that out. You can expand it out here if you know exactly, how big you want each column to be. You can set the sizes within the properties here. And you also always want to keep in mind how users, as you're going through, keep in mind how users are going to interact with the report. If this is going to be exported to Excel, then you're going to want to make sure once you go into the preview pane, from here, you can actually export to different formats so you can see exactly what it's going to look like when your user is interacting with it. But then, the headers, I might want to make all of these bold here, and you can center them. And if we took a look at some of the numbers, these are all dollar amounts, but they're showing with 4 decimal places. I don't know if we really need that. So we can reformat this to actually look like a dollar value. If you look here, we have some components and then some accessories and clothing and accessories. So this is where we might want to actually order some of our data. So if we go into the design here, and you always want to make sure when you're working with reports and you have stored procedures pulling data for your reports, you want to do your ordering and your sorting within the report itself or the designer itself and not in your stored procedure, because that'll give you a performance impact. So we go into here, and that was just right clicking on the table. And this is where I can go into sorting, and now I can add, if I want to sort by my product category, and then you can add additional layers. So I want to do category, subcategory, and then my actual product. And then with all of these fields, I'm just right clicking on them. So this standard cost field, if I right click and edit the text box, so you can think of this table as just a bunch of individual text boxes. I can go in here, I can change this number to currency. And if I wanted to apply that same rule for these two, I could right click and go in and do the same thing. But this is where I said you might want to become familiar with the properties pane. If you look over here, that format is in there. And you can just highlight that there. And then I can select both of these and I can put that in the format, and it's going to update all 3 of them. Yeah.
Can you point the reporting services report at analysis services?
Yes, I just haven't done it.
Okay, so you would not use the stored procedure in that case. You would use pointed model.
Yes, have you
Maybe read that.
done? Okay. Yeah, I know you can. I just haven't.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and then you can use matrices. And we'll do that.
It's a part of the SQL Server stack. It's,
Something DBAs hate.
It's basically like it compresses and optimizes your data model for reporting. So compression is like about 10 to 1. And load times are a lot quicker. And analysis services is always loaded in memory. So when you're reporting, you do often.
You'd think I would.
really fast.
Is that good or more?
Yeah, that's good.
Is reporting services available as a software as a service?
No.
So if you're editing a reporting services report, can you point it at a SQL Server that's anywhere? Right, like if you have a SQL Server instance on a virtual machine, can I edit a report for SQL Server on that virtual machine on my desktop? Yeah. You can do it that way. Okay. But even if the SQL Server reporting services instance is on the virtual machine, I can edit it locally and push it up to that reporting services instance. Okay. Display it that way.
All right, so we created a report. So that just goes over some of the really basic how you get started. This is how you pull your data in. Obviously, there's other things that we would want to do before actually giving someone this report, maybe give it a title, format it a little bit differently. And we'll look at one now where you can see, so if we look at this, accessories is repeated a ton. Maybe you don't want that. That's where you would go into the design, and that's where we would actually work with these groups that we talked about. So I can add a parent group here, and I can choose to group it by product category. It's going to create a new column. So you just want to make sure if you don't want that to be repeated, I'll delete that original column. Now, if I look at my preview, you can see that it updates it, so it groups it that way. One thing that I will say, so all of the changes that we've been making are with the report design itself. If I went into the query and I made a change and then I just looked at this and I didn't see my change, just make sure that you're always refreshing it, because otherwise it's just going to return what it has in memory. So make sure that you're refreshing it if it doesn't look correct. And another big thing to keep in mind, your report and its functionality is really only going to be as good as the data set. So you have to make sure that your data set is right before you actually focus on your reporting. So that is creating a basic report. Does anybody have questions before we kind of look at some of the examples of the more advanced functionality?
So talking about data sets, what are the data sources besides SQL Server? Can you pull from Oracle or Progress or easy connections? Like anything that Power BI can pull from, pretty much?
Maybe not as diverse, but ODBC kind of opens it up to anything.
Yeah.
Right? Definitely all the Microsoft products.
And SQL and reporting services doesn't store anything in memory, does it? So like anytime a report or like somebody pulls up a report, it's actually sending a query out to that data source and refreshing it. If they refresh, it sends out another query. So it's not loading anything into memory. But you can choose to load it into memory, like the whole query result, you would load it in memory.
You can have do snapshots. Done a little bit of that, but it's been a while.
Can you point it at the cloud or like at a data lake?
Not data
So
lake,
not at a data lake.
but like Azure SQL, yeah.
What about like a CSV or an Excel?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
I don't know, but they've done CSV.
Yeah, I don't know about CSV, but I mean, you would have to, it is a relational database management query thing. It's not a,
Right. So the reason for my question is because we have like clients that spit snapshots out every so often, and like I don't want to store those snapshots in the database because they're massive. But if I could like pull some stuff from the database and also include a CSV in the data lake as another source, and then choose which CSV I want based on the snapshot data I want to look at, that'd be really useful.
Can you just right click and
Yeah, do
we'll
you
create
mind-
another data source and see what the options are?
Good, that's fine. Just see the.
There we go, yep.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
there's Azure.
There's analytics, there's
There you
ODBC, OLE.
One specific for Oracle.
What's Oracle S-Base?
So there's no data.
There's
There's
an ODBC, which could, actually, I think through ODBC, you could probably do your CSV. I'm thinking that I've seen that before. ODBC could do CSV.
I think I've seen that too. Yeah.
You still have to have a report server though for users.
All right. Yeah, I'm glad there are people here to help with some of those questions. All right, so we're just going to look at,
Sorry, have you tried
No, that's okay.
XML at all?
no,
So you don't know how it is at parsing XML?
not in SSRS, no. I haven't.
Not good.
Why would you do XML?
Because I don't do XML, but people do XML. I didn't see JSON on there either.
Okay, so just taking a look at this, so I'll jump back real quick. Just so the reports that we're going to go through, we'll look at a few different sample reports. So the employee directory one, that is again using AdventureWorks data, and it's just a list of the employees from the employee dimension there. We're going to take a look at grouping and formatting that was done in that report. The Goodreads book report is one that you guys saw already. It's just a data set that I found on Kaggle of a list of books from Goodreads. And it's not the greatest data set, but it does show the functionality of how we can do some of the grouping and different lookups with parameters. So there we'll look at the different expressions that are used, list boxes and how those function, and setting up parameter defaults. And then the last one is outside of being like a data nerd, I'm really into obstacle course racing and American Ninja Warrior kind of stuff. So I got this data from the Obstacle Course Racing World Championships, and it's just result data from the past few years. And so we will look at using a matrix instead of a table, and then how you can do different totals and toggle different report items to show or not show at runtime. So the first one is this employee directory here. If I click the preview, this is a very, very basic report. I don't have any parameters set up for this one, but I did do some different formatting. So we can see here for every new instance of a department, it's going to have a different color. And then for every new instance of a supervisor, we have some different borders to help break that up a little bit. And all of that formatting was done through the use of expressions. So once you start getting comfortable with building out reports, then definitely start to get comfortable with expressions, because it will really add a lot of flexibility to what you can do. So if I look at one of these text boxes here, I will have a couple different expressions. So one is going to be for that border that we saw between supervisors. So I expanded out this property, and if I click, so pretty much any field or a lot of fields, I'll just show you real quick. If I go into text box properties, it's a good example. Anytime you see one of these function buttons, you can put an expression in there to do something different. And for a lot of the stuff in the properties, you can add an expression. It's Visual Basic. And then so once you open this up, it'll have some of the common functions that you can use. And if I click on one of these, it'll give you an example of what the syntax should be too as you're building it out. I use a lot of these inline if statements. So this one, all I'm doing is saying if the previous, so looking at what we have up here, if the previous value for the supervisor field is the same as the current one, then keep the border as gray, otherwise make it black. And I have an embedded one in there because I found the same supervisor was assigned to multiple departments, so I had to also do the same thing. If the department value changes, basically, then we would put that border in there. So that's a way that just with different coloring, you can do that. And then I did something very similar for actually adjusting the different colors based on departments. So there, that would be the, here we go, the color. And this was one that when I was actually putting these demos together, I wasn't quite sure how to do. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the fact that, I mean, SSRS has been around for a really long time. So if you're trying to figure out how to do something, someone else has probably tried to figure out how to do that thing. So just Google it. And that was how I found this expression that I needed to figure out how to get those colors to alternate. So this function here looks at assigns a running value for each new department name, and then I just assigned the color based on that. So I don't want to dig in so much on the different functions that you can use because there are a ton of them. And there's a link for them in one of the links that I included in here, but just be aware that it's a really great way to add some flexibility to your report. And then if we look at the next kind of step up for that employee directory, I added some parameters. So I'll move this over. And I apologize, the view isn't the greatest using my laptop here. It gets a little cramped. So this is going to look like the same thing, but now we have our parameters. And we can search by department. You'll notice here all of these boxes are checked for title. I have this set up to act as a cascading parameter. So with this parameter, I have it set up, it's going to populate this list instead of allow you to put a value in here. If I only select now 2 of these departments, the title is actually going to read from that also, and now you'll see the list of titles that are available are unique to those departments. So you can link parameters in that way where one will impact another. So then if I click view report, you'll see the number of results I have will really narrow down. If I wanted to search just for an individual employee, I could search here. And if you'll notice the way that I have this displayed, I have it set up so that employee is just one field, but my data set actually does have a first name and a last name field. So that's why I'm able to search on those. So now if I click view report, it's going to narrow it down even more. So that's how you can use parameters in different ways. If we go into these, first name and last name, you have to indicate if you want it to allow a null value to be passed through. The default will not allow that. So if you set a report up and you don't set up your parameters correctly, it won't actually run until you set this up. And then this one, I just allow text. Anybody can type in anything. For the department and the title, you saw that we actually had a list populated. So you can set available and default values. Available values are the ones that you see in the dropdown. So I'm referencing this department's data set that I have over on the side there. And all that is just select all departments from a table. And then you have two options. You have your value field and your label field. If you wanted to pass the value to a stored procedure that was maybe looking for an ID, that's not the most business friendly thing for someone to interact with. So you could say, well, I want my label to be the department name. That's what I want the user to see, but I want it to actually and that would be the value field. So you have that flexibility there. And then in addition to that, if this was all I set up and I went into the report, then it would only allow me to select one of these options. I would have to actually go through and select them first. So I have also in the default values, that same data set. By creating that as a default value, it will automatically default to select all. So that's how I have that set up. And then for title, the way that that pulls from the department is just within the data set itself. So if I look in here, I am using a stored procedure that is looking for the department. And then this parameter, which is the department, is getting its value from the parameter value that I have set up here. So as soon as that's received, that's when it's going to update that list. And then you'll also see, this is where I've used this. I have an expression, or I'm using one of the built-in fields for the actual report runtime. So I've included that in there as well. Any questions on that stuff that we saw? Okay. Looking at this Goodreads one that we did see before, if we run the preview here, and we'll just type in, I just always default to J.K. Rowling. I know there's data there. So if I type this in, this is where I was talking about we used a list box. So you'll see the same thing repeat over and over. I have it grouped by author. With this data set, it put multiple authors in one field. So that's why this is broken out, because they are different authors. And then here I have the average rating. So this is an expression that I used. And then if I wanted to limit it, here I have, this is the number of fields that are being returned. If I wanted to just do, English, update my report, then the number of books that's returned is going to go down. So that's a little bit different formatting and how you can group things. If you still want to group things, but you don't want to do a table, then that's when you can use a list box, and you can embed them within each other. So if I wanted to do grouping by author and then by book and have that book repeat for that author before the next instance of it, you can keep embedding those. So you have that flexibility. If you noticed between these two text boxes, the format looked a little bit different. I'll just run it again real quick. Even though they're both text boxes, the one over here just has all regular font. This one uses both bold and regular font. That was a little bit tricky for me to finally figure out how to do that. And that can be done if within the text box you click on your value, placeholder properties, it gives you a little bit more flexibility with what you can do. If you turn this interpret HTML tags as styles, then when you write your expression, you can actually put those tags in there. And this isn't something I would necessarily expect people to remember to do leaving here, but if you know it's a possibility, then you know when you're working on your report, it's something that you could go and try to figure out how to do again. So you do have the option of using different formatting styles within a text box. Any questions on this one? Anything that we saw? Okay. So the last one is where we have the matrix, and this one's going to look a little bit different. And so you can see the size of it right here. We just see this entered, complete, and percent complete. We see each of those columns one time. Looking down here, we have our row groups and we have our column groups. Now, if I actually preview this report, you can see this one does look quite a bit different than some of our others, and I'm going to try to expand this out a little bit. All right, so I used data bars for this as well, and we have some items that are being toggled. So we have entered, completed, and percent complete repeats for each year. So if I added another year's worth of data, this would continue to grow. And then here, if I click on these, it's going to expand out those items for me, so I can look at more detailed level, or I can look at these summary groupings. And I can continue to expand that out. And this is where these data bars over here will help me to also kind of get an idea of how, like, different trends within the data. So the percent of people who completed versus didn't complete the race, I can kind of see that as I scroll through. So that does give you some flexibility. If there are things that maybe you don't have to see at runtime, but you'd want to drill down into, you do have the ability to do that. And so the way that was done is I did it at the row level. You can do it at a field level also. But if I do row visibility, then you select the item that you would want to actually have to click to toggle and expand the view. So you have that option. And then when you actually create the matrix, that's when you can right away assign what your row groups and your column groups are going to be. And then you can have additional fields, as you saw with mine, outside of those values. So these are all included in the grouping, and you can kind of see where that bracket is showing that. And then these columns are outside of the grouping, so those aren't going to repeat. The data bar, you can embed within this field here. So when you have that field, you can just right click and insert a data bar. You can drag it in there, and then you would actually just right click on, oops, there we go. Come on, you have to, there we go. That's where you would actually click it to configure how you want it to be set up, what values you want to pull in there. And then this one I think is a little bit easier to change some of the coloring and stuff with the actual properties over here. And so that covers everything within that report. Did anybody see anything that I did that you want me to maybe explain a little bit more how that was done?
When you run this, you can export this to Excel.
So one thing, that's where it really, during your design phase, you really want to export to see exactly what it's going to look like, because if you have fields that are lined up like just a little bit off, then it's going to come out kind of weird. So you want to do that. You can also have it set up where for like this Goodreads one, for example, how the author repeated multiple times, you can set it up so that would generate on a separate tab if you were exporting to Excel. So each instance would go to its own tab, and then you could set it up so that it would name those tabs differently depending on if that was something that the user wanted to work with. But you can, yeah, you can interact with it in Excel, in a PDF. If this was going out through email, you could have it in the body of an email or as an attachment, or if people just wanted to log on and interact with it in the reporting server, which is what I'll go over. I don't know, what time are we done? Okay. Okay, I'm not gonna go that long. So if there are no other questions about the report, then I'll just go over quickly the, yeah.
All unclear on reading when your queries happen.
So when I within, so this one, as soon as I click preview, that's when it's running my query. For the others where I have the parameter set up, once I get the parameters in there and click view report, if you have default parameters set up, so this one, I have a default setup for each of these. So as soon as I click preview, that's when it's running the query or the procedure.
What do you have massive data and you want that?
So this one, so the matrix, right? It's the underlying data set might be like 200,000 rows because it's aggregating the 15K and the 3K, whatever. So this thing is actually retrieving back all those 300,000 rows, and then it's as you click on that drill down stuff, it's expanding and whatever. But all those 300,000 rows has been returned to wherever this SSRS is, and then it's computing and displaying it and
So when
rendering it.
they submit their parameters or load the report, it might be a huge delay.
Yep.
And that's just.
For the end users, when they actually get on the web page, you'll notice there actually is a page. Actually, you could probably even see it in here. There is a pagination, and so like SSRS, the server temporarily stores those 300, 400,000 rows or whatever on the server, and only shows you page one. And so when the user clicks next page, it's then showing you the next 15, 20 rows. But it's not hitting the database every single time. It's basically got the data sitting with it and then showing it to you one bit at a time.
So it does load it in memory.
Yep. Temporarily. So if you hit it and then she hit it, that's hitting the database twice.
As long as the database doesn't have an order by it, should come back like that.
So it puts it in RAM or it puts it in like a temp table?
I mean, we're probably getting into the weeds of it, but there is so SSRS itself has its own database. It actually stores it, especially for these really massive ones, it stores it in chunks on the SSRS server's database temporarily to allow you to do the next page, previous page, and then it starts querying its internal database. To get that. But then when you do like export to Excel, at that point, then it's essentially getting it all out of that temporary storage and sending you like a 50 megabyte file.
But it's not like Power BI where it's stored in memory and anybody can access that. So if you did it and then she did it, you both be calling the database.
By default, yes. You could turn on data set caching.
Okay.
That's a little, yeah. Special cases, I guess.
All right. So then just real quick to go through, once you actually have these reports built, then at the solution level, you would see under the properties, I just clicked. Oops, sorry. The project properties. Here I would see where I'm actually deploying to. And then with your reports, you can just right click and deploy those to there once that's all set up. Like I said, we're not going to go into that as much. But once that is set up, this is just an overview of what that would actually look like. And can you tell me if it keeps displaying? Otherwise, I'll just keep it in this view.
Oh, I'm seeing your
The presenter view?
presenter
Okay.
view.
That's fine. I thought that might happen. So I'll just zoom in here.
I think you can turn off the
Yeah, I forgot. How do I? What? There we go. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so this is just what it would look like, with reporting services. So once you have your reports deployed, so the 3 that we looked at, if I had created those reports, they would be out here. The user could then go, depending on how their permissions are set up, if they can see them, go click on the report. If you just click the report, it will take you to actually run it. So you can do that if that's how you want people to interact with it and set parameters, or you can set up subscriptions. So if you're setting up subscriptions, I know this is a little difficult to view, but there, that's a little much. All right, so the subscriptions, you have 2 options. You could do a standard subscription, so send this report out at this time, on this day. And you can just pass static values through to email. Any parameters that you want to run, you can pass those values through. You also have the option of doing a data-driven subscription, which is shown here. And that's where you would actually run a query to then determine what reports are being sent out. With a data-driven subscription, it's going to send out one report for each row returned in your query that you're using. And as an example of that, internally, we have a report that will look every day to see if you entered your time for the day before. If you haven't entered at least 8 hours, then you get a email sent out to you. So it's just a report, but it's in the body of the email just saying, hey, make sure you enter your time. I can show you an example because I get those all the time. And I'm the one who created the report, so it's like extra frustrating. But that's an example. So this query just looks and says, okay, who hasn't returned or who hasn't entered their time? And then it takes their name, passes it through to the report so that that shows up in the body of the email, and then those are sent out. If you choose this data-driven subscription option, then the delivery options down here change a little bit. And that's when you'll get this screen. So then from the result set that's returned in there, you can actually set up the recipients. So if you have emails returned in that result set, you can set that up for the recipients. You can take values and pass those through as the parameters to run the report. So it gives you some more flexibility there. And then this is also where you select how the report is actually going to be rendered when it's sent out to people. Yeah.
Question about row level security. So if I have row level security set up on my database where each user can only see certain rows of data and their level of access, and I make a report based on reporting services and I want to email it to people, will it know based on who I'm emailing it to what level of row level security they should have and only send them the data they're allowed to see?
No, it would be that security would be based on who's running the report. Right.
So if you wanted to email to a bunch of people only the rows they were allowed to see, you'd have to set up a bunch of different email.
Because when the subscription
subscriptions.
runs, it runs using the system account, right? But if you have individuals running the report, like you can have a link to the report, and then that, depending on how you have the report set up, that you can have it so
So the row level
that
security is
controls
passed to
the
the
security.
reporter. So SQL Reporting Services generally, when you're opening a report, you're opening it as you, so you're seeing your row level security.
You can set it up that way. You can also, correct me if I'm wrong, you can also set it up to run as the database account.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's technical to run under a service account.
But you can tell it alternatively to run under the user's account.
Everybody has a user in the database.
You also have to be aware when you set that up, if you don't have it, and then this has happened to us before, if you don't have that permission in the local server, it will actually delete the report.
Wait,
What?
Yeah, we've set it up, and it's like, where did these go? And we did a little research, and we set them up, and if you don't use a service account, you use an individual account, you need to set that up in the local account as well. Otherwise, SQL Server, when at midnight there's a job that runs it, you can't turn off. It will actually delete.
What do you mean by the local?
So it has to have local server rights.
like the service account has to have local service rights, or all of the
The
individuals running
the
reports?
service account should have local rights.
Local mean on the desktop of the user.
No, on the server. Okay. Because it was like, where are these going? And there's a job that actually runs, and it goes into detail if you look it up. It goes out and it's a job that scrums.
I believe you, it's just like, what's the
Not so
argument
the
for doing that?
so it has to have rights to the database and to the server file structure.
All right. Well, that was the end anyway. So yeah, if there are any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks for being so interactive. This was a lot more interactive than Saturday, but I had the last session of the day, so people were just trying to stay awake at that point.
Would you use reporting services as opposed to Power BI?
I haven't worked with Power BI paginated reports, so I don't have a great answer for that. I don't know if anybody has worked with both.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you can't subtract anything in Power BI, can you? But Power BI is a lot more interactive. I
Mhm.
mean, have you,
I've done some like dashboarding and stuff. So if you want to do,
but can you interact? Like in Power BI, if you set up a pie chart and a bar
Uh-huh.
graph, and you click on one section of the pie chart, it highlights the bar graph where the same data.
yeah, so SSRS won't do that.
I kind of
Yeah, I know that there's now like SSRS mobile reports, and I haven't worked with that yet. It's more dashboardy in that way, but I don't know if it has that interactivity.
Manipulate through the parameters.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know. The SSRS mobile. Yeah. But yeah, if you want to like do that kind of clicking and have it interact that way, then that's definitely more Power BI.
So SSRS Mobile is Microsoft had acquired a company called DataZen out of Canada, and it's super sexy looking because it is a mobile first application, and it's just dials and charts and stuff. But if you want to do anything remotely advanced, you can't do it. It is the purest dashboard. It is something to have on a CEO's phone where he just sees a red light and a green light. We're still making money. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's literally like on your car dashboard, you can't tell it to do things. So the dashboard is you look at it.
Yeah.
It's already.
You had asked about using the map.
Yep.
Mapping.
Of some sort. So I haven't used the map in
We
SSRS.
have, and it's the same thing. It's pretty rudimentary.
That's what I kind of figure. Yeah.
We have a whole GIS department.
Yeah, I've used like the map a little bit within Power BI, and I'm like, I'm sure that's way better than what's in SSRS. I've used some of the indicators. Just if anybody has used them within SSRS.
You can use shape. Make your own.
That's a vacuum.
Oh, okay.
It's not an alarm. There's no tornado.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a little late for
yeah,
the monthly.
but the pitch is just the same, though, isn't it?
For stuff like low level security, you also throw in a parameter to run your stored procedure with an execute as